Well, we want to welcome you to Brownfield's 2022 Drought in the Great Plains Roundtable. I'm Kellen Havikin, an anchor and reporter based in Lincoln, Nebraska. I also cover Kansas as well. And we have seen drought impacting the western United States, including the Great Plains. And we wanted to kick off a series of roundtables of discussions that are published each week with stakeholders in agriculture, from producers to climatologists to agronomists to policymakers, help better tell the story of how the drought is affecting the U.S. agriculture. So this is our first episode. And guys, I appreciate the time and thanks for joining us here today. And I'll kind of leave the floor is yours to give yourselves an introduction. And Anne, why don't we start with you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kellen. Yes, I am Anne Meis, and we farm near Elgin, Nebraska, part of a family farm that, along with my husband and his brother and his parents, are still somewhat involved. And we plant corn, soybean on rotation on about 1,500 acres. We're mostly irrigated, center pivot irrigation up here in Northeast Nebraska. Lucky to live over the Ogallala Aquifer. When I say mostly, I would say 80 to 90% irrigated. We've got just a few small dryland fields, and then of course our corners have to be dry land. So this topic is drought. So as thankful as we are to have the irrigation systems, to have these center pivots, they're going to be expensive with diesel fuel. We power those center pivots in three different ways. We have a little bit of everything. We have diesel engines, we do have some natural gas, and then we also have electricity. And of course, the power company regulates when you can irrigate, when you've got electrical power. So those are challenges. Diesel fuel is extremely expensive this year. That's going to be expensive. Yeah, it's when I hear the word extreme drought being used, we're living it. It is extreme drought. We have had no measurable moisture since October in our neck of the woods. So presenting a lot of challenges. We are trying to get some corn in the ground. We're trying to plant right now. What we're seeing is the ground is rock hard. So hard that the planter is not able to go through. And so just had a conversation with three neighbors around having the same issues, and everyone's dealing with a little bit differently. Here in our farm, we've decided to pull out of that field that was previous bean ground because there isn't much cover on it. It is extremely dry, extremely rock hard. We're going to have to pre-irrigate before we can even get that planter in. We're going to move to corn on corn ground where there is some cover. I forgot to mention, we try to be at 100% no-till as much as that's possible. Obviously, we cover up our pivot tracks and do a little dirt work to cover up the ridges or valleys or where waters run. So the ground is extremely dry. We have not tilled because we're trying to preserve that moisture, and we're trying to preserve that organic matter that we've built up over almost 20 years of no-till. We did talk to a neighbor. They're going out in front with a field cultivator to deal with that rock hard ground. So challenges, and every year is different, and we're dealing with those challenges.
And thanks, Anne, for that. And I know as we kind of continue this discussion, we'll kind of visit some of the unique pieces that your operation is dealing with. Obviously, drought isn't uncommon, and so I'm curious how maybe this time sets apart from the last time. We'll talk about that. But I want to introduce Eric Snodgrass, the principal atmospheric scientist with Nutrient Ag Solutions, next. Eric, we just heard from Anne talk about the challenges of the drought. From a climatologist perspective, tell me, how did we get here, and where are we at right now with the intensity of this Great Plains drought?
Yeah, we can probably look back over a couple of years. Last year, much of that drought was very intense throughout the Great Basin, throughout the West, into the Pacific Northwest. But throughout winter, while December kind of painted one story, once we got into January, the jet stream kind of shifted to come out of the Gulf of Alaska. And then what that tends to do is kind of expand the rain shadow. So there's a natural rain shadow, of course, on the lee side of the Rockies. And we've seen it move pretty far through Kansas, Nebraska, parts of Oklahoma, Texas, and into South Dakota this year. And until the jet stream kind of shifts around a bit, comes a bit more to the southwest, it's very difficult to pull Gulf of Mexico moisture back onto your farmland. I mean, it can't happen physically in the atmosphere. A lot of this has really been built on what's gone on with the persistence of La Nina. If we would have had this conversation back in January, at that point, we thought we'd saw some signals that the La Nina would fade slowly through spring. And instead, it's not only maintained strength, but really kind of strengthened a bit. And what that's done is that's just invigorated the North Pacific jet stream to really continue its push straight over the mountains rather than dipping and pulling moisture from the Gulf into the plains. And even when we do let that happen a bit, like the big storms we just saw here the weekend after Easter, they came through and put down large hail, and they were followed by 40, 50, 60 mile an hour winds, which meant if you put moisture in the ground with those storms, it was just gone with the winds that followed it. And when you see the temperatures keep climbing up into the 80s and 90s, I mean, in late April, 80s and 90s, what did get there evaporates pretty quickly. So the drought situation, unlike a year ago, where the La Nina faded hard in winter, it's not doing it this year, and we didn't break that drought cycle. We're about to get into, the time of year where the only type of precipitation we get is from thunderstorm activity as well. And when that happens, it's hit or miss, who gets it and who doesn't. So what's scary about it, you asked about the climatological perspective, is that there are parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, South Dakota, and Texas where from the start of the year till now, we're looking at some of the driest stretch of weather since 1893. So that includes the very iconic Dust Bowl of the 1930s. So we worry about how this is going to play out through the remainder of the season. So it's front of mind for us. Way over here in Illinois, we're watching it very carefully. I hate to say this because it feels so unfair, but I got 3 inches of rain the other day, and we're not moving in our fields either because it's been too wet and too cold to do anything. So it's a case of the haves and have-nots this year. And unfortunately, I think that's going to continue as we go through the rest of April and into May.
Eric, appreciate that perspective. And now Lynn Justesen's the technical services lead with UPL. Linda, tell us about your background, what you cover from your perspective. And then we heard from Anne talk about the challenges. What are you hearing from growers? And maybe let's get into some advice you've got as we really ramp up planting here.
Yeah. So, I cover all the bad area and the too wet and the too dry is all within my territory, I guess. So with UPL, I have five agronomists plus myself in our territories. We're located in Fargo, Amarillo, Texas, Jonesboro, Arkansas, Champaign, Illinois, and then I also have another one in Omaha that's a seed treatment specialist as well. Now, with that, we're on the edge of the drought where I'm at. Right, we've had some moisture. We had good fall moisture last year, but this year in eastern Nebraska, where I sit, just east of Lincoln, we had less than a foot of snow all winter, and that is pretty rare, right? So not great. But we listened to one set of calls, and I talked with one set of my reps, and it's up until last week, the Fargo and the Amarillo ones, it was drought. Things are terribly dry. We have pre-water, which Anne just spoke about. You go to western Kansas, western Nebraska, where even in the Texas where it's drought, typically we have enough moisture we don't have to worry about pre-watering to get stuff up. And this year, I think it's going to, quite honestly, it's going to become the norm. The bad part is we're very water limited in a lot of those places anyway, and that's not helping at all. And then as you move east, then much as Eric had said, the Champaign and the Jonesboro, Arkansas, every time a cloud comes over, it leaves an inch of rain, it seems like, right? They're just wet, and they're on the other end of that cycle. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I think the lesson in all that is this, or my 2 cents worth. And I think Anne and her operation are addressing that. They're pre-watering. She mentioned no-till. I'm a huge advocate of that. I know not every field that works on, but a majority of the places we're at, that saving of that half or 3/4 or an inch of moisture by the limiting of tillage is huge. It can be the difference between getting a crop up or not. And And at this point, if the soil is fit, do what you need to get corn crop in. It's nearly time. We're looming in on the 1st of May. The 1st of May is not yield robbing typically. Typically, most of the Corn Belt, we're going to say somewhere around May 15th is where we start to maybe question and start to lose some yield in corn. We're not there yet, but we're certainly up against it. I think the thing is as you look across the whole brownfield network and you look everywhere out there, is we're trying to get the corn in, and the soybeans are going in at the same time. And the soybeans probably go into this soil and these rougher conditions a little bit better, but it's hot and dry in one place and it's cool and wet in the other. But like last year, Kellen, we saw that this very same setup, and about May 1st, everything just switched, and we went to cool and wet, and we got April in May, and May was in April, right? It was completely backwards. So I think the thing is early like this is do everything you can to get it up and get it up right. And again, we're getting late enough. There probably isn't a replant chance, right? So do everything and take every little step you have to try and get it up. Because corn is so sensitive to that. Soybeans, we don't have to have them all quite up, but corn is very sensitive to get them all up. We can get them all up in 48 hours. It's even better. And if that means pre-water, maybe it's pre-water. Maybe it's a matter of sitting and being a little patient, where we're out a little farther east, and make sure that the ground's completely fit. Maybe go plant beans for a day or two and then come back and do corn. I think the beauty of today is versus what we've had other times when we wait. I would be shocked. There's not many farmers out there that can't plant all their corn in 7 days, right? That's not a very big window. If we can, and many of them, it'd be less than that. If you can get that narrow window, get the right window, just keep that in mind. I know it seems like we're against it, but just exercise a little patience and plant it when it's right. Now, we're going to get in 2 weeks. That might be a completely different conversation for sure. But I would do and the other thing I would do is if you have the opportunity to do anything in furrow, things are very efficient, whether it's a fungicide, whether it's an insecticide, things to just protect and ensure that we get the best crop up we can. There are, sometimes it's a fungal year, sometimes it's a bug year. It's hard to tell right now what that looks like. I would protect both of those. UPL has a nice lineup of that, but so do some others, right? So it's not just ours. I would do everything I can to protect the plant and get it up the best you can. If you're doing in-furrow, if you have in-furrow capabilities with fertilizer, I would probably recommend that too, because it's, again, you're making sure that plant jump starts and that plant has the best environment it can early in its life. And as tough as things are, and for a variety of reasons, I think that's of critical importance this year.
Lynn, thanks for that. Anne, let me ask you this question. As we're talking about getting corn out of the ground, I've talked to a handful of different farmers across our 3 states, and they're concerned about not having enough soil moisture for germination, and you get into the south central part of the state, and that they're saying that they're worried about that. In your area and on your operation, I know you said you pre-water, but is that a concern for areas that you haven't pre-watered, or what are you hearing from growers also in your area?
Absolutely. We do have some dry land. We rent some ground, about 100 acres. That's 100% dry land. And we have we have some dry land, and I don't know if there is enough moisture in there to get germination. It is a real concern. We'll wait and see. We're doing some of those things that Lynn talked about, doing as much as we can in furrow. We're definitely adding insecticide, knowing that it may sit there a while, and we're doing that in furrow. We're putting fertilizer. We did not plan on pre-watering. That came about a decision 2 days ago. We were going hard and strong and trying to get it in the ground in that rock hard, and it just simply wasn't going in the ground. The planter couldn't divide that hard dirt, so we backed up and replanned and said we've got to pre-water. And I also agree with what Lynn said. We are committed no-tillers, and you almost have to be committed to that, because we're watching our neighbors get out there with their field cultivators, try to get that. Yes, their ground is looking better, and maybe they'll get some seed come up, but we're trying to preserve every bit of moisture out there, and we're trying not to disturb that. So it's always a risk. Which way do we go? Should we have gone out there with that field cultivator and get that ground loosened up so that we could get that seed in? Or we decided the path we're going to try is to pre-water. So time will tell.
And how is the current situation with the drought playing into the larger conversation of high input costs and the volatility within all of the markets, fertilizer, fuel, seed, chemicals, you name it?
Yeah, that's the real conversation. It costs a lot of dollars, some big capital to put that in the ground. I think this is the year where that crop insurance is going to come into play, and people are going to rely heavily on that crop insurance. There are a small percentage of us out there that don't buy crop insurance and try to brace ourselves for tough years like this.
So the last part of our conversation, guys, I know we're feeling it in the Great Plains, and I know it's been windy in other parts of the states. I probably never thought we'd be talking about wind as much as we have. And so, Eric, I'm curious, why is it so windy across part of the United States right now?
Yeah, and what's interesting is when you look statistically, we found that the wind speeds are about 5 to 7 miles an hour on average faster. And that doesn't sound like much, right? Like 5 to 7 miles an hour. But over like a 90-day time span, that's a huge difference from normal. And how many times have we seen coming out of the plains massive dust storms, or coming out of parts of like Montana? Montana's been hit so hard with such incredible winds. They've made it all the way across the eastern Corn Belt as well. And we've heard of reports of bad winds down south. In fact, if you have managed to get away from the really strong winds, the synoptic scale winds, they've had all the severe weather down south early this year. So you ask why? One of the big things is that really powerful Pacific jet stream, which we have seen since February. The momentum of that is carried over the mountains and then displayed in a stronger pressure gradient at the surface for us. So it's basically about it's a conservation process. We've got so much speed in the jet stream that's coming off of the Pacific that when it comes over the mountains, it's there to stir up large low pressure systems. And what they end up doing is producing these deep lows, which have tight pressure gradients and strong winds. You then combine that with a lack of moisture. You combine that with the lack of anything growing, you don't slow it down near the surface. So it picks up the dust and it carries forward. And so, yeah, that's been the major problem this year. But it's funny to think it's only 5 to 7 miles an hour different, but that is a huge difference overall.
Can you tell me, Eric, we're having wildfires in Kansas and Nebraska and parts in South Dakota. Tell me, how long is the state at risk for that?
The state's at risk until the fuel is gone. And the thing is that the fuel has been there for a while. We've had dry vegetation in some places, like it's been talked about going back to October. And so any dry grassland, anything left in the field, that can serve as fuel. So until something green is there, this will continue to be the case.
And what has the wind been presenting in terms of challenges for you guys?
Monumental challenges besides the stinking irritation. But anybody who has done any tillage, it's creating huge dust storms and driving hazards. We don't want that topsoil to blow away. And then as soon as we get that seed in the ground, we want to follow with spray. And there's no way we can apply any of our crop protection and weed inhibitors, and we just can't get out there and spray. And then we are trying to irrigate, but that wind takes the precipitation, so it's very inefficient to run a center pivot in this kind of wind.
Lynn, let me ask you, from this stage at the planting season, what from your area is wind being the main concern?
I think just what Anne had just talked about is ours is. I don't think it's any mystery to anybody what we've had for supply constraints, and I think that's a really nice way to put some of the frustrations we've had in and around that, getting what we want when we want it. I think the thing that is starting to get me a little bit more spooked is that, to that point, is if we get it planted and we have enough moisture to get it up and we can't get the pre-emerge on, then we're going to rely on a post-emerge system, right? In a hot, dry environment, more than likely, so less efficacious. And we don't have any sort of a residual or anything else helping us out. And by the way, we don't have as many post products sitting around. We don't have barns full of that, right? If you don't have it, there's a high probability you may not get it, right? If you don't have it secured already. So I'm just fearful that we're going to try and switch and do things a little different if we don't get our timely. And I'm thinking of our pre-emerges right now, Kellen, that we have to get them on, because if we don't, I think we could be setting ourselves up for a bit of a train wreck, weed control wise. That once we do start watering, or if we do get rain and we don't do a sufficient job with that, I mean, it could darn sure be it. My biggest concern with the wind is just that, is getting applications and getting our herbicide applications done timely, let alone if you're doing something with a liquid fertilizer application and you're spraying it over the top. That's dangerous, right? I mean, one, you're going to have off target, and two, we could see some really bad volatilization if we can't get that stuff rained in or get it into the soil rather quickly.
Yeah. What's that time frame, Lynn?
Tell me what humidity, temperature, and all that is, but I really like to see that in 7 to 7. I mean, you know that, man. That's a loaded question. I would really like to see it in 7 days if I can, though. You know what I mean? That 7's a great target. Sometimes we have more, and we have much more time than that. But as of today, and with the drought and the heat and all that, I would be anything past 7 days. It's time to start maybe considering some tillage. As much as I hate tillage, it may be enough, because you may be you're risking, do I lose fertilizer or possibly lose moisture? And I don't know. At that point, that's a really tough decision for you to have with you and your agronomist as you talk through that.
Eric, you mentioned this and I think when we first started our conversation, and I've heard it and seen it on social media, comparing what we're seeing in 2022 in the Great Plains similar to the Dust Bowl. And I'm curious, even from Anne's perspective, how can you compare what it was like, and talk about that relationship? Is it a worthy anecdote right now?
It's only a worthy anecdote from what we measured at that time in terms of precipitation, because we had entirely different farming practices back in the 30s. You talk about the differences between what we did now in terms of tillage versus back then. Those are just two entirely different things. But when I just look at the precipitation statistics, and you start to see there's these pockets, these climate reporting districts that are showing up with the driest conditions going back to 1893. Well, I mean, that includes the 30s. And so we know we're surpassing that in certain places. The difference is, I think, if I could say there's a difference, is that at least we've not yet seen the dust carry clear to Washington, D.C. That did happen in the 1930s a few times. In fact, we're just, what was it? It was back on April 14th, 1935. That was Black Sunday. That was the big one. That was the big dust storm that got the whole world's attention. So the parallels are there in precipitation, but entirely different in terms of field practice. I'm sure Anne can speak on that.
Guys, let's wrap up here. Last question for each of you before you guys have the floor to add anything else. Where do we go from here? And let's start with you. Where's the journey? Where's the path headed?
Well, we're certainly going to have to get tough and figure out the path forward. And, our ancestors did in the 1930s. They decided what they were made of and how they're going to problem solve and figure this out. So yesterday we made a turnaround decision, because we knew that we have to get that seed certainly in the ground. Spray application is going to be our next challenge. How are we going to get that pre-emerge on? And we need water to get it working. So we just take each day and make the best plan we can with what we have in front of us.
Lynn, from your perspective?
That'd be the same. I would just do like what Anne and their operation. They're obviously very on top of that. Plan it as you go. And just, again, don't be overreactive, but as things change and you have that opportunity to do it out there, when you get time to do it, don't wait. It may take some unorthodox things where if we're calm and we have the ability to at night and we don't have any burn downs, you may have to make some night applications just to get stuff on so it doesn't blow off target. And I know that sounds a little crazy to say that, but that may be the only calm time we have.
Eric, what about from your perspective?
There'll be two things I'll be watching. The first one's kind of an east versus west. And I think the dividing line might be the Mississippi River this year, just to see how tight and cool things are in the east versus how dry and windy things are in the west to get things started. And from there, it'll just simply be watching how the La Nina continues to control the atmospheric flow, what the ocean temperatures do in the North Pacific specifically, as that could really increase drought risk if they get colder in the Gulf of Alaska. That's an early sign to be very wary of late season drought expansion for the whole Corn Belt if those waters in the Gulf of Alaska, even back over to Japan, get colder. So that'll be the front of mind things for me.
Guys, as we wrap up, anything else you guys want to add that maybe we haven't talked about here?
I was hoping for a ray of hope from Eric. He's not giving us too much to give us hope. So we're just going to have to rely on our resilience to just power through.
Let me give you a little hope, okay? There is a system coming through at the very end of April, and so basically next weekend. And some of the latest prognosis for that was trying to bring more moisture into the eastern halves of Nebraska and Kansas. The previous system gave us the same signs and then kept shoving it east, and that was a problem. But at least I've seen some consistency there. What we have to watch out for is just to see if by the time we get into June, if the main ridge axis sits on the front range, we're going to be in trouble. If it goes to the Great Basin, that could spell some relief for us. But here's the worst part about it. How do we typically break a drought? We typically break it with severe weather. So you go from one extreme to the next, and I don't like to see that. So I'll have to be watching the sky for all accounts to see if it goes up violently or keeps suppressing everything one way or the other. That's how the plains are going to go this year.
I think there was some small ray of hope in there somehow, somewhere. It was hard to find, but it was maybe there.
I'll do my best. I'm an optimist at heart, so I'm rooting for this next system to deliver that moisture. Because here's the thing: once you bring it in, it's recycled. It stays. It's good. It'll help the system continue to put more rain down, but we have to break past that first. And I'm just going to keep blaming the jet stream until we see it break its pattern away from the northwest.
Well, guys, appreciate it. Anne, Eric, Lynn, we know you guys are busy, and I appreciate the conversation here today and helping us tell your stories and how the drought in the Great Plains is impacting your guys. So thanks so much for joining us here on the first roundtable discussion.
You bet.
You can always check out brownfieldagnews.com each week as we continue to have more discussions next week. Well, this week we looked at crops. We're going to transition next week and talk about the livestock sector, especially cattle producers who are trying to manage forage and feed costs as well. So we're going to take a look at the impact that the drought is having on the livestock perspective. But for Anne, Eric, and Lynn, I'm Kellen Havikin, and you've been listening to our first episode of the roundtable discussion for the 2022 drought in the Great Plains, and I appreciate you watching.